And we are live for the 71st episode of the Mattriarchy. Wow, I have been doing this for 71 weeks. And with me today I have Mike Hutchison.
Applaud. Hello.
And who's not actually blonde. And
some hair.
And RJ from Critical Blast, who I do believe actually has a brain. I don't think that's just fake. And today we are actually talking about stuff that is not. It wasn't my idea for the show, is what I'm trying to say. RJ came to me and on the Twitter and said, "Hey, you have a talk show. You like to talk about history and comics and weird stuff. I have an idea for you." So before we get into blaming RJ too much for it, let's go around and let's talk about our comic. What's the word? Oh my goodness! I had this great thing.
Provenance?
Yeah, not provenance. It doesn't matter.
Street cred.
Why should you care about comics, Mike?
Why do I care about comics, or why do I think you, the viewer, should care about comics?
No, why you, Michael Hutchison? Why do you care about comics?
Well,
I'm going to kick myself and remember this word.
I'm torn between saying I don't and I still do, because I went out and bought some comics, but they're the first comics I bought in a while, because I don't really like a lot of what's made nowadays, but wow. But I still have a great fondness for the stuff that was put out in the 80s and the 90s, late 70s when I was a kid. They were what I read when I was stuck in the store and there was nothing else to do while my parents were shopping. And, there's, and that's not even a way that kids get into comics anymore, except for maybe buying an Archie on the checkout stand, but I don't know that it would jump out at them during the little bit of exposure to the, what's it called? The grab it checkout thing. But I read a lot of wonderful stories that were inspirational, because I mostly read DC. And at the time, DC was inspirational. So that I don't know. That's a short. I don't have to go into it too detailed.
Yeah.
What about RJ?
And for years, Mike, I was trying to lead into. Well, for several years, about 20 years ago, you were the editor-in-chief of Fanzine, the DC Comics fan magazine online.
Yeah,
and that's how I met you, because yes. I was looking for a way to practice writing, and all I cared about were the DC characters. And I saw that you guys were taking submissions for this fan magazine, and I said, "Ooh, I can get published by people that'll tell me what's wrong with my writing." And it's like school for free.
Yeah. I don't think I ever said anything besides "great job," so I don't know how good of a teacher I was.
No, Nick took me to task a couple times.
I put out that fanzine online for 6 years, and then was kind of hoping that experience would lead to my getting into actual comic book writing, and that was the early 2000s, and that was right around the time that I didn't want to. They killed off Elongated Man's wife, and I didn't want to work for DC anymore. So, but I had tried to publish for a while. So
that's the one.
Yeah,
everything is in reach.
And right on the opening of that book, the intro is by I forget. Grab it. Who reads the intro? I forget, but he says something like, "I bet if you ever read comic books, that your favorite superhero was not Elongated Man." And I'm like, "It's mine!" Joss Whedon. Yes, Joss Whedon. Like, Elongated Man's my favorite.
Yeah.
As long as we're showing off here. See? Right here. I got
it. Hey, you know what?
So, yes. But I do love... Fly Fox Pro says Identity Crisis is garbage.
Well, and here's the thing: is like Meltzer. I've read his novels; they're good.
Yeah.
Like, the quality of the storytelling Identity Crisis is not the issue. I actually think it's an editorial issue where an editor say, no, you cannot wreck the sandbox.
Yeah.
Take your cat home. You cannot wreck the sandbox. And I think I think it's an editorial problem, not an authorial problem. But
that series got worse and worse. And it was not the writing. The writing of the characters was wonderful, wonderful. I'm hearing a lot of echo on my voice.
So, well, maybe that's me. Let me turn my volume down. Sometimes it feeds back off my microphone. Sometimes not.
Okay.
I don't really understand enough about it. I don't want to like play the boomer card because I'm far too young for that. But I also just have a stock system. There's no bells and whistles.
Yeah. But Brad Meltzer actually emailed me when Sue Dibney got killed off. And he said, don't lose hope, keep writing. So I had just vented how horrified I was when I figured out. I figured out a month before Identity Crisis came out that it was going to be Sue Dibney who would be killed off. Just because,
really?
Yeah, because it said Elongated Man was going to be a central part of it, and it would deal with the satellite days. And I'm like, who could it be? And I figured out what it was. And part of the reason Identity Crisis stinks is that Ralph does not solve the murder of his wife. Other people do. You can't kill off Watson and not have Sherlock Holmes figure it out who killed him.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do that.
That is an excellent point that I had not thought about before, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit that.
Anyway, so we should intro RJ.
Absolutely. RJ, you've heard this speech. Go.
I'm sitting here now thinking how much I would love to write an Elongated Man and Sue story with them dead. I mean, you're all too young. I'm too young, really, but I had older parents to remember a movie called Topper.
Mm-hmm. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's a police detective who is haunted by two ghosts who help him on cases. And what better way for Sue and Ralph to come back than to play the detective role for a living detective and help him out on his cases?
Well, and they hinted at that at the end of, what was it, 52 maxi series, right? Yeah. They were riffing off of the Dead Boy Detectives idea, but nobody ever touched that again before they killed the universe, right?
Right. I actually talked to Mark Waid that was at the end of 52, and Ralph gets killed off in number 42, I think, week 42, and I actually loved the confrontation where he sets up Faust and traps him in Fate's Tower forever, along with what's his name, the evil devil guy. His name escapes me at the moment, but that was like, it was ingenious because, as the guy says, Ralph has nothing to trade, and then they kill off Ralph and find they can't leave, and it's like, so this guy can reanimate the dead, he just won't do it. Now he has a reason to bring Ralph back, and Ralph says, I will let you out if you bring Sue back, except that that's not what they did. And when there's no way to, it's like, what was he trying to do if he doesn't accomplish anything in his face-off with Faust? It doesn't make any sense. And I asked Mark Waid about that, and he said he was actually going to send me the original script because that was all completely editorially rewritten. So I don't know what he originally intended to do. Mark Waid never followed through. I emailed him. He never wrote back. But I would love to see the original storyline because I'm sure that he had to be up to something. Ralph had to be planning something because he's not stupid. So
Right.
Yeah. I'm not sure what comes of facing off against... I cannot believe I can't remember the devil guy from Underworld Unleashed, but
Neron.
Right? Neron, that's it. Yes. So yes, Neron. He traps Neron and Faust in the tower, and it's like, that's genius. And like the very next week, like a few weeks later, a few months later, whatever, they jump a year ahead, and Faust is out. So it's like, well, he didn't trap Faust forever. So, he didn't even accomplish that. So I don't know what the point was. Clearly, there's a lot at DC that just gets editorially meddled with, and you wonder how many good stories there were that started out good and didn't get to their end.
Well, I was listening to... I'm sorry, RJ. I didn't mean to step on you there.
That's okay, yeah. Doomsday Clock comes to mind for me, something that should have been huge. I mean, if Julia Schwartz had been alive, there'd have been Doomsday Clock on the banner of every major masthead that the company was publishing and could have meant something. I mean, you just started with Dr. Manhattan saying, I have renewed interest in human life. I think I'll go create some, and jump straight to Green Lantern number 40 with an electric blue hand holding a galaxy. That's how that should have gone. But my comic book cred goes back to 1971. I was born in 67. I was born in Sparta, Illinois, which in 1971 was where every comic book in the world was ever published at World Color Press. So there was no place to buy comics. Even the grocery stores didn't carry them because everybody worked at the printing plant and just brought the extra print runs home. If you wanted comics, you went to garage sales, or you went to a friend's house and said, hey, did you bring anything home this week? I was learning to read comics, Superman comics. My first Superman comic I remember was him being stretched through the earth while he's grabbing at the U in his own logo and crushing it and telling the reader to run or they'll be next, which I got at my barber shop. I was reading fully by kindergarten, and I didn't tell anybody that I knew how to read. And it wasn't until like first grade where, my teacher was holding up one of these big placards of, something she's reading aloud to the class, which I've already read ahead. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to play with my shoelaces now or something for a little bit here. And she's like, would you like to read to the rest of the class? And I'm 6, man. I don't get sarcasm. So I just looked up at the card and I said, plants create energy through a process called photosynthesis, in which they take sunlight in through chlorophyll. And she's like, so, okay, straight. It's like, you want me to hear about how the Floronic Man used to do this against the Flash? Because that's how I read about it. By the way, antimatter and matter should never touch because it's bad.
It's flashbacks.
I had flashbacks at 6 years old. I knew this stuff.
This is interesting, Matt. Were you an early reader as well? Were you reading pretty well by 5, 6?
Well, I was reading pretty well by 5, but I didn't start reading comics, like comic book comics until I was 11.
Sure.
I was reading the funnies, but my introduction into comics was actually through the cartoon show DuckTales. And I grew up down in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My family's from the High Plains where I live now, but we were down in Oklahoma at the time, and we had DuckTales on the television. It was in syndication, and then we moved to Nebraska, and it wasn't anymore, and we couldn't watch it. And I was just like, man, I really missed that show and all of the action and adventure of it, and the mythology and the bagpipes and all the thing. And I'm at the grocery store, and there they have DuckTales comics that Gladstone was publishing at the time, and they had reprints of Donald Duck Adventures and Uncle Scrooge stories. And I was just like, the old Carl Barks stuff, but I didn't know that. I thought they were adapting stories for this cartoon that I was into. I had no idea that all that stuff was created by Barks back in like the 40s and 50s, and I'm just reading reprints. And so then I was picking up my DuckTales and my Uncle Scrooge Adventures and the whole thing, and digging on that. And then there was Batman that was just sitting over there, and I'm like, well, this looks interesting. I remember Batman from the Superpowers cartoon, and it just hooked me. And what really hooked me was I loved radio shows, and so they Now was publishing the Green Hornet comics at the time, and so that hooked me in really good. But the introduction of Tim Drake as the third Robin, and that hit a chord in my soul, because I was this dorky Gen X kid reading about this dorky Gen X kid who happened to be Robin. And I was like, this I like this a lot.
Yeah. Oddly enough, one of my first comics was when I saw it at my grandmother's. It was the Uncle Scrooge Adventures, where the giant robot that is used as a construction robot gets taken over by the Beagle Boys. That was adapted into a DuckTales, and it's just awesome that one of the few comics I ever read of Uncle Scrooge was one that was adapted into the cartoons. But you must be a little younger than me, because it sounds like you came of age like late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. And I was born in the 70s, so just 3 years after RJ there.
I was born in 78. That's the
Okay.
that's the time frame and all that. So
Okay. So your parents saw Star Wars and went out and celebrated, and you came along.
something like that.
Okay. I actually I loved Uncle Scrooge, and all those comics that I found at my grandma's turned out to be my uncle's, who was only 15 years older than me, and he had a massive collection of like Marvel monster comics and stuff like that. Stuff I wasn't into and I wasn't collecting myself, but just a treasure trove of comics. And my grandma saw something in one that she didn't like, and the entire collection went in the fire pit. So yeah, nothing valuable, because he was, he just had stacks of comics unbagged and just laying around.
Vampirella comic.
What's that?
That one Vampirella magazine just.
Yes. I'm sure it was a vampire book or zombie book or something. So yeah, it's amazing how often I hear that story, by the way, of somebody's comic book collection just went in the garbage pile. The kid left home and comes back and it's like, I cleaned your room, I threw out all those comics, like you throw out a whole bunch of newspapers. And
my dad had a Mickey Mantle card that was like his second or third season when he was just hitting his stride, and that went away when he went to college. So
but that's why they're valuable.
Yes,
because when the collecting thing started in the 80s and people were saying, hey, comics might really be worth something, it's because all the ones in the 70s and the 60s had been stomped on, had the coupons cut out of the page for, to send off for the 100 plastic soldiers. And
they were recycled in World War II during the paper drives, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what made comics valuable. When everybody wanted comics to be valuable and they put every single one in a collectible bag, then they weren't valuable. So
well, it does keep you from getting the edges folded when you're sorting them. So I like that.
I still say that comics need some way to retain their value. I'm not saying that they should be inflating in value, but I have a hard time paying. This is why I don't really buy comics much. I have a hard time paying $4 for something that is instantly not valuable at all, or worth less. Yeah.
And so, and part of that I think is I think that our some of our model of like production needs to be updated, and I think we got to figure out some way to work that around so that there's either the price point's lower so that it's not a risk, or that that there's I don't know. That's not the show. That's not what we had the show for. We're getting totally sidetracked.
Yeah.
It's been
We'll talk about that Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we have a but like I said, RJ got a hold of us and Will got a hold of me and said, hey, I have an idea for a show, so why don't you tell us about it?
Okay, well, this takes us back to the halcyon days of 1988. I had just gotten my first job right out of college, and I had to sit and wait for a clearance. I had to go to work, but I had to sit in a room with nothing but a computer. There was not this thing called an internet. People got on the computers, and then the computers would whistle a little tune, and then you'd be connected somewhere. One place I got connected to was a place called Execunet, and it was just people would throw files up there, and I found this file for a Batman Writer's Bible, which I printed out, and I have that right here in these yellowed papers. If you feel the edges, it's still perforated. Your paper used to have little holes on both sides of it that fed through 9-pin printers, and your printer was like, you waited an hour for a page to come out and listen to zzz, 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 zzz. It was fun times. But this was written originally in December of 1987 by some guy I had never heard of called J. Michael Strazinsky. And it was a treatment for a Batman cartoon series that was going to focus on Robin. And this was before, way before Bruce Timm had anything proposed, but well after the Lou Scheimer New Adventures of Batman. It was time. This was right at the time that the Tim Burton film was coming out, and it was right to have Batman in television again. So I printed out all 60 some odd pages of it and waited, I had 8 hours with nothing to do, and it took most of it.
How do you know that it was animated?
Well, it said it was going to be animated, and it was from Nelvana.
Oh, okay. I don't see animated said anywhere, but I couldn't tell.
It talks about I think it mentions cartoon somewhere. I can't remember where the page is. I got to say I read it real fast.
Yeah, well, it's right here. It says, in the ARC file, you will find this explanatory note and the following items: the Batman Bible, the pilot script for the Batman animated series, and an outline for an additional episode.
Yep. I just saw it. Sorry.
So,
yeah.
Now, I don't know. I know one of the things I meant to do before we did this that I did not get around to doing is I was going to look up and find out if we can find when Strazinsky, like his career path, because this was obviously before Babylon 5, before he was a big name. And there's
not too much before 4 years before Babylon 5, maybe, or in terms of production and when he was doing the production. Yeah.
That's probably true. That's what talks about the production. I wasn't really in when like I hadn't been according to the Wikipedia quick I looked up, he said his career started in 79. So I don't know what that means, but there you have it.
Yeah. I think he did a lot of I don't know if it was soap opera necessarily, but it was a lot of stuff that kind of lent itself to writing for Babylon 5, episodic stuff. I want to say, did he write for Murder, She Wrote or something like that? But anyway, I don't really know his career in detail either. But I was looking over the dates. I had forgotten that on the very first page it says the dates here: first draft, second draft, final draft. But the I could actually figure out when he wrote this just based on the fact that this was written when Jason was alive, and so it was before Death in the Family, which was the end of '88, and it was late enough that it had the ventriloquist in it. It came out in February of '88. So somewhere, and it says final draft March of 1988. It's like he must have just read that issue and ran to the printer and added ventriloquist in here because it was only a month or two earlier. But it's such a good story. What's that?
Right before he did that, he had been writing for animation. He had done 9 episodes of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, 7 episodes of She-Ra, and 13 episodes of Jason the Wheeled Warriors. So he had contacts.
The Wheeled Warriors. Oh my goodness. Sorry. 80s flashback. Sorry.
Captain Power.
We all have them. Yeah, Captain Power, man. I remember those toys.
I did. And the Soldiers of Fortune.
Yeah, I am young enough. I was the target audience for those. I mean, like I was at that age at that time, but they were above my family's price range, so it was a firm no. So, but I was like, Brave Star and Mask and those properties that was like 3rd to 5th grade for me. So
yeah. I was in the same problem, third to 5th grade. That's when Star Wars came out. I didn't have one action figure. And fun, oddly enough, my friends who lived in a trailer and had an above-ground pool and lived right next to the outdoor movie theater, I thought that they were rich because they had a whole bunch of Star Wars toys and the Millennium Falcon, which is really expensive.
Yeah. Well, you decide what to spend your money on.
It's all relative, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and of course you have the movie theater right next door. That's a bonus.
Yeah. The drive-in movie theater, yeah.
Man, I tell you what, this is a side note from everything, but like they're talking in my town here out in western Nebraska about building a drive-in movie theater. There's been our local, like we have an old historic theater that does like art house cinema now, and second run stuff and that kind of thing. But with the whole coronavirus and social distancing, they've been doing like a pop-up drive-in theater at one of the local museums where they've got a big wall on the museum building and they bring a projector and everyone tunes in their car radio to whatever, and then they watch the show.
Which is cheaper and better than having to listen to those little speakers that you plant on your window. Yeah.
Well, it's been so popular that they're considering, they're looking into it, and I think they're going to probably pull it off, of actually building a drive-in theater in 2020. I mean, imagine that. Can like everything old is new again. I tell you what.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's probably better than the old experience because you can listen to really good wraparound sound on the right car anyway.
Yeah, if you got the right car.
I didn't mean to distract from the topic of the.
No, yeah.
May I actually divert for just a second, if you don't mind? Obviously, I never went to Hollywood. I never became a writer for anything, but I've always said that, you know, we have the Gotham series and we have the Batwoman thing, and it's like they just won't do Batman. They just can't do a Batman series, and it's like they just need to take the money that they threw at Game of Thrones and throw it at making a Batman, because done right, and this hits a lot of the points that if you spend 50% of the episode just talking about, you know, Bruce Wayne's secret identity and Robin and their relationship and their family life, you know, that is stuff that you don't have to spend on special effects, you know, during that time. It's the same thing with Babylon 5, the way he did it. You get a lot of talky stuff, and then you have the big action stuff. That would actually be a good formula. And for the longest time, I've said that the right way to do this would be to do a Boy Wonder series, where it's all about Dick Grayson and him learning, you know, maybe by episode 3 or 4 that the guy he lives with is Batman, and have the Batman stuff be there, but it's focused on Jason, or pardon me, I'm saying Jason because of the writers by here, on Dick Grayson, you know. But you know, that would work, having it focused on the real growing up stuff, because the old, done right is the right way. Yeah, if you do it right, it could be a great thing. Yeah, but having, you know, Dick Grayson's time as a kid was never explored too much. You know, he was just the sidekick, and his home life was only explored really in the 80s, when they started looking backwards at stories that they never told during the 50s, 60s, 70s. You know,
in the late 70s, when they had Batman Family and they had Dick's. The late 70s, early 80s, in Detective Comics, the backup feature was Robin. And he was away at college.
But by then he was going to college. I'm just saying he wasn't a high schooler or you know, middle schooler or whatever he would have been when he started. Yeah, that's all true. I meant. Sorry.
Well, I think one of the things you have is I think there's an awkwardness about how to balance those things. And you think about even like other characters that they've tried to give similar treatment to, right? Chuck Dixon did a really good job of it with Tim Drake's Life and Robin, right? Peter David did a really good job pastiching that kind of story in Young Justice. Power Pack has some of that same kind of stuff. I love that. That's the stuff. The second issue of that miniseries was just one of the 5 seminal comics that like got me into the life.
Right here.
Year 2.
Yeah.
What I loved about Robin, and no one ever talks about it, is there's a scene in there where he starts getting trained by Lady Shiva. And she wakes him up in the morning, and she says, "It's time for you to become a man." He's like, "I'm not sure I'm ready for this."
Yeah.
And she doesn't say, "Don't be stupid." She's like, "Later." like later tonight, or
everything is awkward. Why are you talking to me? But yeah, as I was saying, is I think the part of the thing is I think there was
you know, reading the Robin of
Oh, go ahead.
Is there a lag?
I think so.
Sorry. I didn't see you talking. I'm getting a lag. I'm sorry. When I was reading I read all these trades that I went and grabbed because I did not see Chuck Dixon's early Robin work. And it was kind of hit or miss. I'd see issue 1, issue 4, issue 9, So I went and grabbed all the trades, and I'm rereading them for the first time just this last year. I say rereading them. I'm reading them for the first time this last year. And yeah, getting exposed to them. And the way Batman is in like the Obey a Man story, if you read it, Bruce Wayne is so feeling and sensitive and caring about this kid and his his family being in jeopardy. And it's like you realize how much of the Batman is an a-hole stuff they've really amped up over the last 2 decades, where he's just a psychotic that has real problems relating.
And you think about it, those stories, whether it was Wolfman, whether it was Alan Grant, whether it was Chuck Dixon, whether it was Doug Moll, right? Those guys got it, right? They knew, like, okay, if we want to make this guy believable and relatable and driven, we can't have everything turned up to 12, right?
Yeah.
Right? Or whatever your gauge is. That there has to be some mediation in there where yes, he's got an impossible dream. Yes, he dresses up like a bat, but we have to belie the conceit. And the conceit is that he's not a terrible person. He's not a terrible father. He's got some trauma, but he's dealing with it. And that they could tell these guys understood, and I think genuinely liked the character. And a lot of modern writers, I don't necessarily think actually like the characters. And that's one thing, even in the treatment. I don't want to cut ahead too much of the discussion about that, but with the Writer's Bible that Straczynski put together, he gets it. And the thing that there's like Batman's like father instincts or whatever, that his desire to protect and guide and educate and rear these children isn't, of course it's a fantasy world, but that's what gives him that's what makes him reasonable, right? that's what lightens that is that role, which is the same thing that Wolfman got to in The Lonely Place of Dying. That was Tim's entire speech to Bruce. His entire speech to Dick was like, Batman needs a Robin because Robin is light and life and not grief. And,
it wasn't until Frank Miller that the Robins were called soldiers, rather than wards and partners.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that was out of place, but I think it's one of those situations where later writers, and not all later writers, but I think some later writers picked the wrong lessons from The Dark Knight. Just like I think that almost everybody who's written comics in the last 30 years has picked the wrong lessons from Watchmen.
Yeah. Yes.
So, and that's my theory on that. But now, so when it comes to the layout on the pitch, I guess, does somebody want to just kind of give a breakdown of what Straczynski's vision was for the series? And there are some really interesting things I thought that I want to bring up after that. But
I think RJ should go first.
Well, he definitely presents Batman and Robin as father and son. I mean, he comes right out and says that. And I like that he kept the Jason Todd origin for this. At least the original Jason Todd origin, which is the one I saw, which is, Batman's out on patrol one night. He catches a bad guy. He goes back to where he parked the Batmobile, and he looks at it and he says, "You've got to be kidding me," because the tires were gone. Jason Todd was a wily enough kid that he was able to boost the tires off the Batmobile. Not only wily enough, but ballsy enough to attempt it and get away with it. And of course, Bruce tracks him down and then finds out he's the orphan and brings him home to live with him.
And one of the things
for Jason to learn that, hey, this guy I'm living with is Batman.
One of the things I thought was really interesting too, and this is kind of deep lore stuff. So they kind of Straczynski blends the two origins of Jason Todd, because before the crisis, before the crisis, it was just Dick's origin, but instead of it being mob guys that were playing the heavy against the circus, it was Killer Croc, who was trying to muscle in to the organized crime thing. So it was a little bit supervillain, a little bit crime family kind of stuff. But other than that, it was just copy and paste, carbon copy from the original Dick Grayson's original origin story. Only Dick was a character in it, and so there was the passing of the torch in the old continuity, and there was Batwoman, the retired Batwoman, the old Silver Age Kathy Kane was a character. It was her carnival. That was I don't know if you guys remember, she had after she retired from being Batwoman, she bought a circus.
Yeah.
Well, she was a circus performer then too, I thought. But
yeah. That's right. She was in the circus, and then she bought the circus afterwards. But anyway.
Now I'll say this about the whole Nightwing and Jason Todd thing. To me, this is a pivotal moment in the entire DC universe. When Dick Grayson says, "I'm no longer the second half of Batman, and here's my new blue and gold looking cool George Perez designed outfit, and now here's this other kid who's going to be Robin." At that moment in history, this clock started going tick, 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 and we saw the passing of time to the point now where we've got God knows how old Bruce Wayne is, and he's raised 4 teenagers and has a 12-year-old son, and I think somebody
13.
posted a picture. Yeah. Well,
they had him take a birthday over so he could be in the Teen Titans.
He's gone with Tim Drake, and now he's got Damian.
Yeah.
And somebody.
And that's all happened in 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody posted on Twitter the other day where he was like at the scene of his parents' death. He's like, it's the 10-year anniversary, and Nightwing standing beside him like, wait, what? How did that get that editorial? So Bruce is 18 years old with 4 kids.
Yeah, even when they had Robin age to college age, I mean, that was the start of the real aging. Robin has always been pivotal to the screwing up of the DC timeline. Yeah, because you really can't have a kid go from, I don't know what he's supposed to be, 8 or 13, somewhere in there. They've thrown out both ages, but he's going from 13 to 25, and then I think he stayed an eternal 25, but that's 12 years. Yeah, and then you've got Jason Todd. Who Jason Todd was only around for continuity-wise a very short time, really. Right. Well, and that's one of the things that left Robin at the same age for a long. Not Dick. Chuck Dixon left Robin at the same age, eternally 14 or 15. Eternally 15. Yeah, he was 15 for ages, and then as soon as he left writing Robin, they upped him to like 18. And he's dating Wonder Girl all of a sudden. He's like the same age as Superboy and all those others. And so Chuck kept the age for a while.
At least they did take years to do it. It's not like, Brian Michael Bendis just jumped in and said, okay, magic.
We don't want to mention Brian Michael Bendis today. We don't have time for me to go off on that subject.
Yeah. I do believe Damian Wayne is supposed to be magically aged somehow. He's not. It's not a natural progression of from a baby. But
they did the whole Azrael raised in a vat kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what the here it is.
No,
no. Every book at hand. No. Yeah. Yes, Son of the Demon. I have that one too. That's a good. It's well handled. I mean, they even kind of explain that. He says, wouldn't your dad's a proper guy? Shouldn't we be married? And she says, well, we are married. We were in a wedding ceremony, and under his country's traditions,
Yes.
Only the bride has to say I do. So we've been married for years, and it's like, that's
Which
a cushy way to
way
get
better
around
than
that.
saying that Talia raped Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, which is
That's
the funny thing about that. Like,
yeah,
I would be on board with Damian Wayne not ever existing. Like, I think it kind of, because I'm a Tim Drake guy.
yeah, me too.
Which I will get back into. Actually, I want to address that thing in the thing, but I'm a Tim Drake guy, so I would be okay with him not existing because I think that Damian kind of, like, they gave Tim short shrift, and instead of doing what Chuck had always intended to do, which was like have Tim finish his mission, fix, like fill that role for a while, and then go on and have a life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's that Chuck's made no secret that that's always how he saw it. That someday Tim's not a superhero anymore. He has a life. He's got a wife and kids. He lives in the suburbs. He does real things with his life, and he's just got it.
He has a little chip in his head that turns him into the Joker when he's 40.
No,
I hate that story.
Yeah, that's actually a very different. That's a. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. No, because I think that actually ties into the Strazinsky pitch in a lot of ways, but believe it or not. But one of the things that instead of doing that, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and so they DC editorial strip mined Kingdom Come so that they could keep Tim within the thing, and I don't think the whole Red Robin, it was a clever idea in Kingdom Come, sort of, but every time they've pulled something out of Kingdom Come and put it into the main continuity, it's stupid. That's
yes.
With the one exception I think to that rule is the idea about Plastic Man's son Offspring. They've done some really clever stuff. Kyle Baker in his Plastic Man series lightly borrowed that concept for that. That was borrowed by Mark Waid in the Justice League series. I think it was Waid. And that was pretty fun. But every other time, it's just been a trash fire. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. But one of the things,
we do a show about what Kingdom Come has wrought on the DCU. Believe me, I love Kingdom Come, and I hate the fact that you can't just appreciate it as its own series. DC has to go, now let's make that Captain Adam's actual costume because it looks so much better. Except it only looks good when it's done by Alex Ross.
Yes.
They screwed up Black Lightning's life because his creator says there's no way that he would have ever had the characters get divorced if they had two daughters. Yeah. So they've had to do a lot of backpedaling and fitting that in somehow because they wanted to have the daughters, but then have them be superheroes now, and it's like it's just. Dude, so much of this stuff is like just leave it the future, and that's fine. But
and one of the things that actually, and I've had last month I had another webcomic pal of mine on to discuss about why Kingdom Come is terrible, because I actually don't think it's that. I mean, it's enjoyable on its own, but it's also kind of trash. And I mean, you can like it, but I think that the biggest problem is that the minute they added stuff to the DC universe, it was a nail in the coffin for the post-crisis universe. And that's when I was reading comics as a young man, but I genuinely believe that like the post-crisis DC universe was the best iteration of the DC universe, right? I know that it's not, people may disagree on it, but I think the idea of the heritage, the long history, the legacies that were put in there, the idea that the golden age is a very real and tangible thing, and that these echoes of these heroic actions from the past affect people today. It felt so real and lived in, but it was also fantastic. My personal favorite way to look at the DC universe is through the lens of Starman. And where it's that moment that's fixed in time, it ends in the year 2000 and reflects all the way back to 1938. And that encapsulated universe is just the best way to experience the DC universe, in my mind.
But the thing about the post-crisis universe is that you had to have heroes die after that, because it made no sense to have all these people who fought Hitler still running around in tights in the 1990s. I mean, Jay Garrick is pushing 80 and he's still stopping bank robbers.
Yeah, and there are reasons that are explained in continuity, Ian Carcall and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But that was one of the beauties in Starman, is that Ted Knight, at the end of the series, he used up all of his chances. That's just what it was, and his passing was beautiful and sad and noble all in the same time, and even going back to the beginning of the post-crisis universe, the crisis itself, Barry Allen, his death is more impactful than his entire published life. And and I mean, and I like Barry Allen's Flash. I love the Silver Age stories. Carmine Infantino is a god to small g, god to the art form. Yeah, but and so like the stuff he did in Flash, it's inspired as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's the Michelangelo of comics. But at the same time, his death was more meaningful in terms of like the opera of a universe, right? And when they brought him back, they just said, it's not that cool. But
I prefer the way that Marv Wolfman was going to bring him back. He had an out that they were going to use, and that was the fact that he had come from the future, so he had all this time in between that he could come back to the past, find out how he was going to die, and realize he was living on borrowed time, and just do it all with time travel.
That would be something. I could see that in a limited series. I could see that. But anyway, but we didn't come to talk about the crisis. So, so what do you guys think about the decision? I mean, I know part of it is a product of the time in which Straczynski was writing this treatment. Yeah. But what did you guys think about the decision to use Jason Todd in this pitch?
Well, I think they wanted to make it concurrent with the comic.
It's clearly a Jason. Oh. It's what? Sorry, I was talking when he's talking.
Started
you got to say who
you guys started at the exact same moment.
I'm going to let it go left to right.
RJ, you go first.
I think they wanted to do Jason because obviously Jason was Robin at that time in the comics. Because at that point, in the 80s, television people and movie people were smart enough to realize that if you're going to sell a comic book with a 30-minute advertisement once a week, that should be a comic book that's actually being published, which is something that Marvel kind of forgot when it got into its whole making 2.5-hour advertisements for comic books that were no longer being published. So
we lost Matt.
Move.
Yeah, and I think it's at the time that he's writing this, he has no idea that death in the family is going to happen. So that could be Jason Todd as the Robin as he sees it for the next decade or two. You may as well start establishing that the comic book Robin is Jason Todd, and not be stuck with Dick Grayson when that's not reflective of the comics. Exactly. So that actually does make sense. Of course, his Jason Todd is much more lighthearted, much more of the pre-crisis Jason Todd, who, if you see the he appears in Superman when Superman's trying to figure out who has
there's the lag.
That book of him album all about Superman.
Hey, one second.
Yeah,
I'm gonna drop you down off this thing and try to re-add you because we're getting some really bad delay here. So give me a second. Let me try to see if this works. I think it's your connection.
Okay.
That seems better.
And he's back.
That seems better.
Is it better? I apologize. Did you get any of what I was saying?
We heard
no.
Superman. Okay. What it was about Jason Todd, but I don't know how far back I have to go. But Jason Todd.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. It's getting bad again.
1988. They had no idea they were going to kill him off at the time he's making this pitch.
Yeah, I don't think can.
I see nothing but spinning. Oh, there.
Okay,
back.
so
Matt's not.
Oh, well, yeah, we're locked up. Hutch, why don't you drop off and then reload the link and then come back, and we'll see if that fixes
I'll do that.
it. So,
how do I exit? Or can you exit?
You just I can't. Can I kick you? Let me see. Oh yeah, I can kick you. Yeah, okay. I've never done that before. I hope he was prepared.
Hope it doesn't block the IP.
Oh man, I didn't ban him. I just kicked him. So,
well, that's fine.
So hopefully that's fine, because you can ban people. I don't like having that kind of power. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Well,
so,
then.
yeah. I was really intrigued to his point, though. But no, one of the things. Oh, here he comes. Here he comes back. Let's see. Let's try to. Hey, that's instantly better, I think. Okay, so Superman was the last thing I heard.
Now you guys are frozen. Okay. Jason Todd in 1988 was Robin, and as far as J. Michael Strazinsky knew, he would be Robin permanently for the future. So it's best to establish that this Jason Todd is the current Robin, because obviously it's never going back to Dick Grayson. You got to get the audience used to that. Do you hear my dog barking?
Yes.
Okay. As long as it's not coming across too strongly. If it does, start waving. Okay. Anyway, so Jason Todd was Robin, and that's why it's good to boomers. Okay, I'm not a boomer but anyway. So Jason Todd was Robin.
We're never going to know. We'll never know.
Well, we're never.
This isn't going to work, is it?
To the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop before we learn what this man knows about Jason Todd.
Now, that might be a boomer reference, but they did make that joke for 30 years. So
what's that? I missed it.
How many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? I was seeing that one in the 90s still. And I'm like, man, they've been playing this commercial since I was 6.
3.
And then when the internet became a thing, I discovered they've been playing that commercial since like 72.
Yeah, I saw it in 72. Yes. Okay, are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Are you hearing my dog okay?
Until you say Superman, then it's all going to go to hell.
Yeah. As soon as you say Superman, we're in trouble. But I can't hear your dog.
Okay. So Jason Todd, the way he was portrayed in the mid 80s, before that silly retcon of him being a criminal, and then they started giving him much more of a sleazy personality, to the point that he might have killed somebody in one storyline. He was really kind of bright and cheery, the way Dick Grayson used to be. And the best reference for that is when Batman appeared in the Superman comics, because Batman was helping figure out who wrote the photo album of Superman. Superman gave this album to Batman and said, can you figure out who made this book about me? Because it was just found. He doesn't know it's his own mother who put it together. Ma Kent put that book together. And so Batman takes it. And when he comes back, he's got Robin with him. And Robin's just this, oh my gosh, it's Superman. He's just all bouncy and happy and bright. He's not at all the Jason Todd that people know nowadays. And so that's kind of what comes through in this pitch, is much more of the mid 80s presentation of Jason Todd. He's still the red-haired kid at heart.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. I think that
I'm spinning again. Did you get any of that? Or did you just hear Superman?
No, we heard the rest of it. But I think it was in 83 when Jason Todd was introduced. And then and then it was up until 87 that Max Allan Collins had the criminal history origin for Jason Todd. But even after that, if you look at like Invasion, and the Invasion crossover, Jason had this indefatigable like optimism. Like he knew that people were trash, but he wasn't going to let that hang him up, right?
Yeah.
And it was, and that was even after the boosting origin, and of course when Strazinsky was putting this pitch together. So it's really interesting. I mean, I think that part of the reason that, like maybe again, I'm not sure about this, but I think it was editors in '88 that were like, we need something to separate him other than just his origin story from Dick. And so they had him go through all this identity crisis, you know, kind of stuff that led up to Death in the Family, right?
And of course, Death in the Family was, you talk about bringing stuff from Kingdom Come into the DC universe as part of canon. The whole reason Death in the Family happened was because Jason was a good soldier.
Yeah.
In
yeah.
Dark Knight Returns.
Right.
And he was shown as a, You know, when the first time I read Dark Knight, I thought that Gentleman Ghost had done something to Robin, and that was his body in the case there. I didn't realize that was just a memorial to Robin. Because Gentleman Ghost was a Batman villain at times. He was a Batman villain in the is it Doug Mensch or Doug Monk? I've never heard it pronounced.
I always thought it was Moink, but maybe I'm wrong.
But yeah, the thing I loved about Gentleman Ghost in the 70s and 80s was that Batman never solved who he was. It was like he's doing things that only a ghost could do, but then you'll find a tape recorder hidden somewhere with sound effects on it. So it was straddling the line between Phantom Stranger and Scooby-Doo the whole time.
Yeah. And actually, and like a lot of Alan Grant stories are like that too, where like Batman's, you know, finding these physical stuff, but also like dipping his toe into the Fox Mulder occult kind of stuff. And I loved once again, I cut my teeth on Alan Grant's Batman. I just love it, but not actually. I was 11, but you know what I mean. Yeah. I had all of my teeth.
It was good to not know Logan's real name. It was good to not know whether the Gentleman Ghost was a ghost or a criminal with a really good gimmick.
Or both.
Yeah.
It's good to know there's only one Joker and nobody knows his name.
Yeah.
And if we can talk about some of the other stuff from this pitch.
Yeah.
We should do that.
Yes, let's do it.
The villains are very much, I mean, there's nothing where they take a new take on any of these characters. I mean, this is pretty much the Joker right out of the comics, the Catwoman, the Riddler. Clayface, I think, is only in the fact that he's still Matthew Hagen, and who was dead at the time. He died in '85 in Crisis, but that's fine. You know, I'd rather not have 7 Clayfaces. You know, having one Clayface who's Matt Hagen, that's fine. Catman.
Hey, let's turn your video off.
Being in there was
that's actually an idea there, Hutch. You're roboting.
They take them seriously. I've always thought there's more to Catman.
Hey, Hutch. Hutch.
Oh, I think he's dead again. Oh man.
He's frozen in time.
He is. So, okay. I'm gonna leave it for now and see what happens. And we'll just keep talking as though he was here. Yes. I did want to get because let's leave the villains aside. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the Robin situation is, like I said that earlier, they do a fun job of kind of marrying the pre-crisis Jason Todd with the post-crisis Jason Todd, so that the origin, his spunky spirit, that whole thing is a factor, but also the kind of more upbeat, and like I said, like during the Invasion crossover, Robin was the same old Robin. He wasn't all angsty and everything, right? And that kind of stuff. But the thing that's really interesting about that is when they when Bruce Timm's animated series comes on, I don't know if they had access to this pitch at all, but some of the same dynamics were in play when they introduced Tim Drake. And their Tim Drake was very much of a blending between Jason Todd and Tim. He had a lot of Tim's style, but he didn't have some of Tim's personality, but also some of the pre-crisis Jason Todd's outlook and stuff. And they kind of was a blending of that, and some of those same dynamics that Strazinsky mentions in his pitch ended up getting put into Tim's New Adventures of Batman and Robin. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if there was if those were just like, if that was like a zeitgeist kind of a thing. But I found it really interesting. So
it's possible they did skip right over Jason when they did the Bruce Timm. I mean, it went from Grayson to Drake. Right away.
Well, and I think that actually makes a lot of sense too, because Death in the Family, depending on who thinks that's a good idea, like I said, I mean, I think that Jason was so good as a ghost. I mean, him being dead was such an important part of Tim Drake's journey. The beginning of it, the foundation of it, the solidifying of it, and the legacy that Tim lives under as Robin is like, I'm doing this for Batman. I'm also doing this to honor who came before. I'm doing this for Dick. I'm doing this for Jason. I'm doing this for Barbara, and so there was such a legacy that was, and once again, one of my favorite themes is legacy, right? So having that be part of it, I thought was so powerful. And the way they brought Jason back in continuity kind of killed all of that. So we won't talk about that for the moment. But yeah. Not just that, but I mean his whole demeanor and personality and the Red Hood thing. I think that was it was disrespectful to the themes that had been done before.
Yeah,
and I don't think it was
a violent, murderous character before he died.
No,
he was a little edgy, but not that bad.
Yeah, and it was one of those things too where he was like trying to find who he was, and that was a big part of it. And the guy that might have died absolutely had it coming.
The diplomat who had immunity, who he slipped. You never saw that happen. Whereas, 20 years down the road, Batman's coming across dead bodies that Damian Wayne definitely left there. And it's like, Damian, we don't do this. Now let's get out of here before you go to jail.
Yeah, very different tonality stuff. But I think that the fact that like the chipper and the cheery Robin, that was part of it, was cool. Now you were talking before you left us, Hutch. You were talking about villains. So let's go back to the villains.
Makes me want to rip my hair off. I am pulling my hair out. I'm sorry, that's my internet.
Turn your camera off.
Oh yeah, one thing that RJ said is that if it starts happening again, if you turn your camera off, it'll reduce your bandwidth, and that might keep the connection better.
Okay. Where it says stop cam. Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try that.
Yeah.
All right. I was talking about villains. I was talking about, and I don't know what you might have said in the minute or two that it took me to get back.
But, I went back to Robin.
Okay. Catman. Catman's a character who I started taking seriously in Alan Grant's that wonderful detective comics that has the Catman and Catwoman in silhouette on the cover. You probably remember that one.
Yes, I have that one.
Tiger gets out. What's that?
I have that one. That is excellent.
Yeah, that's the one where he falls off of a skyscraper, lands in the back of a vehicle, and he lives because he's got that 9 lives cloak. It's just, I love that there's a character that you can just do stuff to. Catman, long before Gail Simone really redid him, I really wanted to take that character that Alan Grant had, and when I was doing my Elongated Man pitch, Catman was going to be somebody who showed up in some of the stories. I had this never went anywhere, but my pitch for Elongated Man was to do a 4-issue series called Mystery Date about how he and Sue started dating. And this is on the East Coast because she's an East Coast girl. She doesn't live in Central City. I think that's always something you get wrong when you have a debutante who's from Central City in the middle of America. No, she's big city, East Coast, you know. So she'd be kind of running across Bruce Wayne. I actually had a scene where Sue Dearborn is one of Bruce Wayne's girlfriends, the arm candy for to somebody to ditch later that he always has, and she's smarter than the usual arm candy, and so I had Catman on there. I wanted to do stuff with him because I thought it'd be so funny to have somebody who can, you could just kill him and it's okay because he can come back. There's that was actually referenced in here. It's not a cloak, but he's got a totem. JMS is making slight changes, and the Penguin. This 88 is right around the time that all the Batman writers started redoing some of these villains to be more serious and not hokey. You may remember the Secret Origins Batman special that had they did the Riddler as a game show host type thing. The guy who was like filming him talking on all this giant equipment, and he says that guy has some real charisma. He could be like on TV or something. And what I remember most is the Penguin's backstory and how it's like the reason he has a umbrella all the time is that his dad died of the flu because he didn't have an umbrella, and his mother insisted he have an umbrella all the time, which just made him he's always carrying an umbrella, and he dresses a little nicer, and everybody just taunts him all the time in school. And I always thought it would be funny if just once the Penguin is telling somebody, he always had to carry an umbrella, and it was his curse. And somebody said, they make these ones that collapse down, and you could just put it in a bag and just have the Penguin go, oh, my life could have been different.
Penguin always had some of the best one-shots.
Yes, he did. But I don't think anyone's take on the Penguin is ever the same. Some people have him as a fop. Some people have him as a joke. Is it Max Allan Collins who did the story where he's like in love with somebody named Pigeon, and he gets out of prison. He's got like a prison uniform that's a suit, but it's all prison stripes. It's a prison stripe suit that he had specially made and everything. You remember this was like the Love Batman annual that had a Clayface story and Penguin. And
I don't think I read that one.
No, it's a really sweet annual. It was a sweet story, but the Penguin actually starts dating. What's that?
I think they referenced that in the Penguin affair that Alan Grant and Breyfogle did, but I didn't. So I some of the elements I've heard, but I think it's because they talk about it in that story. But I haven't read the story itself.
He actually is in love with this woman, and he claims to be going straight, and Batman is constantly hounding him, and the Penguin just has this woman speaking out for the Penguin and saying about how wonderful he is, a lot like Margaret Dumont from the old Marx Brothers movies. That's what this woman is clearly patterned after, and she's just, my beautiful birdie would not do that, and she's just a big flighty, a society gal. And they're dating in this little love nest, and the Batman's like, he's up to something, and he actually busts Penguin, and it turns out that he's just hiring ex-cons, and he's not supposed to because of his parole. And so the Batman, who had shown up to say that he should not get paroled, and he got paroled and is dating this woman, Batman shows up at the parole hearing saying, I made a mistake, he should be let out. And everybody's like, no, we made a mistake giving him parole. And so the Penguin goes back into prison. It was an interesting story because this is back in the days when Batman still showed up for court cases and parole hearings and things like that. But
of course,
yeah,
take the word of a masked vigilante.
Yeah.
My favorite was there was a one shot where I don't know if it was Penguin triumphant or what it was, but when it went back and forth between Bruce Wayne in the cave and Penguin in his place, you find out that anonymously, and they don't know it, but Bruce Wayne and the Penguin are playing online chess against each other, and Bruce Wayne is losing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is Penguin triumphant.
And he tells Alfred, he's talking about the Penguin. He's like, he's smarter than I am. If he'd get over this obsession with birds, I would lose.
That's a fun take.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, but like I say, the Penguin is different for every writer who handles him.
Mm-hmm.
I think every approach is viable except for Tim Burton's.
Yeah, that one doesn't work. But
actually, that's. I'm sorry.
The secret origin story you referenced earlier, where it was the Riddler introducing kind of all the stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was called "Win is a Door," but there was a Riddler story at least called "Win is a Door." I think Neil Gaiman wrote it.
Yeah,
and he talks about the evolution of all these villains, and he's like, the Joker is killing people for Christ's sake now. What's going on? What happened to the days when we ran across giant typewriters and billboards with coffee pots on it, poured out real coffee, and you tried to dump it on the Batman and trip him? What's happened to all these guys? They're psychotically insane now.
Yeah.
I just want to tell riddles and rob banks.
and I was always torn on that story because the Joker killed people in his first appearance. So
right.
I get what he's going for, and at the same time, it's like it's a little too meta commentary, Right.
Well, one of the things
really
about one of the things about that too that I think that like looking back at one of the things I really love about Young Justice, and that I think that modern writers don't get, is that you could have the universe is big enough. All fictional universes are big enough to be serious and not serious at different times and sometimes at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. So you can have Batman matching wits with a Riddler that is not lethal, that wants to rob banks and wants to bamboozle Batman, but doesn't want to cut people open and sacrifice them to Barbatos, right?
Yeah.
And that's like the Gotham TV series that was out, right? I liked a lot of it, but I liked big chunks of the first two seasons. It ended up being a hard no because the second season, it just, there are parts of it that are good and there are parts of it that are just awful. But one of the things you have is like everybody's got to be a psycho killer, right?
Yeah. And
listen, okay, when everybody's a psycho killer, nobody's a psycho killer. Wait, right. Take that back. But it starts to lose its weight when everybody's got the same shtick. And one of the things that I think that Batman comics in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s did really well, and I think that's hinted at with the way that Strazinsky was talking about this story, was that it was broad, right? There was a broad appeal because there was lots of different kinds of stuff, and sometimes the stories were very dark, and sometimes the stories were not, and the best writers could play that off with the characters really well. But Dark Knight Returns, Dark Knight Returns was so popular that after that point, it wasn't hard until the late 90s, I don't think, but from 87 on, there was just this tendency for people to take Batman darker and darker and darker, and all of the street level characters darker and darker and darker, so that everybody was Mad Dog, if that makes sense to you, if that's not too deep a cut. Every story was a Mad Dog story instead of, we have a Mad Dog story and we have, the Robin backup stories, which were just like those early Robin backup stories in like the late 70s, early 80s was just fun, man. There were fun little mysteries. There was, Dick in New York City doing the Robin thing on his own. There was, the stakes felt high, but you knew they was going to pull through. And it was a different tone than, like Court of Owls or something, or the New 52 story where Joker cuts off his own face, because that's a thing.
I don't. So much of modern Batman is like worse than Hannibal Lecter. It's like you think about how shocking Silence of the Lambs was when it came out, and it's like I read some Batman stuff, and it's like, I don't know if you remember when Batman died and Dick Grayson took over the role, the Hunt for Batman, or I can't remember the name of it. You can probably go find the book, RJ. But it's the thing where Dick Grayson took over. I felt I had to have this because it is the essential storyline for the Bat books that explains that Dick Grayson is taking over now that Bruce Wayne was killed in Final Crisis. And so I bought this book, and it's got stuff in there that I could not sleep for a while. It was so terrible. I mean, there's a scene where Damian Wayne is driving around in the Batmobile, having swiped it, and he's picked up a girl in the Batmobile. And she's wearing pink shoes, and I don't know, she's kind of flighty. I don't think she's meant to be a prostitute, but he's picked up a teenage girl and is driving around with her. And Oracle comes on the little screen and says, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that, and say goodbye to your passenger. And she uses the ejection seat to eject the girl who has done nothing wrong. And then as he's driving the Batmobile back, Killer Croc runs at the car so hard that he knocks it into a swamp, off the road into a swamp. And Damian Wayne gets out, and Killer Croc approaches and says, thanks for the snack. And he's holding a severed foot with a pink shoe in it. So he ate the girl that Oracle ejected. And then Nightwing shows up and grabs Damian Wayne, and Damian says, hey, can we not talk about this? And he's like, oh, okay. And it's like, what about the girl? There's some poor family wondering where the girl is. It's like she's never mentioned. And then Two-Face actually is like, Two-Face is like leaving Gotham City at the end. One of his lieutenants had said that the Penguin wasn't taking over some territory, and he was. And it's all a miscommunication, but nobody in Two-Face's organization knows that. And so he says they're on a boat leaving Gotham Harbor, and the guys at the back are chumming the water, and with a big white bucket full of chum. And he says to the guy, you betrayed me, and so you can join your wife and kids in the hereafter. They're waiting to meet you. And you'll notice that there's a wedding ring on a finger and eyeballs and stuff in the chum that they're throwing in. So Two-Face killed this guy's entire family and is using them ground up as the chum for the sharks that he's throwing the guy to the sharks. It's like, that is really dark. And did he even flip his coin to decide to do this? It's like, Two-Face is just a psychotic killer at this point. It's what?
Right.
This stuff is too dark, I don't think it's like I can't imagine. This is the story you have to read to follow Batman, and it's like it's worse than the Grant Morrison's what was it called, Arkham Asylum book, in terms of disturbing. It was something that said mature readers on the thing. Oh, there he goes to get the book.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and that's one of the things that, like,
I'm not gonna do it.
but that's one of the things that I think that, like, the pitch goes into is that it wants to be serious enough for children to take it seriously, but also have enough levity so that it's not, scary. And I think the Dini Tim series did a really good job of writing that line. Where and I've got a friend, Matt, who's a writer, and the way he says it is he wants stories that are just scary enough so that young boys feel brave reading them. And I think that's a very important thing. And I think that's one of the things that I really got from reading. I think that the Batman the Animated Series captured very well in 92 or 93 or whatever it was. And that Strazinsky was going for with his pitch too, was that same kind of feeling where it's the scary bits are just scary enough. Yeah. And then the silly bits are silly, Yeah. One of the things that I found,
92. It was 92. I can tell you 92. For a fact. Yeah, it was 92.
Which is now here's a question. Straczynski pitched this in 88 and it did not get picked up for various reasons. In 92, Tim and Denny's series was released, right? So were these competing for attention at the same time? or nearly the same time.
It will have to be, given how long it takes to develop.
I know, right? That's something I hadn't really thought of while I was looking at it. I was just thinking about what worked and how they were similar, and a lot of the stuff that I thought that was similar from Straczynski's pitch to what ended up happening in Denny and Tim's stuff was the second series, was that the New Adventures series that introduced ventriloquist, or he was played a larger part, that whole stuff. But it was in the second series.
The special assistant to Gordon, the Frederica Miles. You know, it's like, well, they didn't really do his take with that she's like a 1940s thing, but Renee Montoya kind of fills the same thing, that, you know, you have a female kind of prominent. She's a guest. She's not in every episode or anything, but that was an introduction thing that Gordon would be up there, and usually when he's up there, Montoya's up there too. So
now, who developed Montoya? Because she was really new in the comics when
she was from the animated series. She was introduced in the animated series.
Oh, was she?
Yeah, she's from the animated series, and so is of course Harley Quinn.
Yeah, Harley Quinn. Yeah. And I mean, I remember like and Bullock was another character that had come to prominence to the animated series, but I know he was in the comics first.
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
Bullock and Ketch and I can't remember the other. There's another cop that
Bullock
was.
had a great story arc too for you know, an overarching character progression, because he was a dirty cop, and you got to see him, you know, go through the redemption process of becoming, you know, a good cop.
Yeah,
in the comics or the animated series? In the comics, he was okay.
Yeah, and I think the best story they did was one called Mr. Harvey and Detective Bullock, where you know, he's this sloppy guy who's a detective, and then you go home with him, and he becomes a much neater person. He's got a very fastidiously kept apartment. He's got these 1940s gangster film posters on the wall that he's got framed up real nice, and you really got to see more of inside of him.
Yeah, I always loved his film lover. The fact that he was always a film lover. That was part of his character back then. Came in handy during the film freak thing, but
yeah.
So he's kind of. I think that the character who appeared in the 1989 movie was basically Bullock by, you know, another name.
Right.
Harvey, yeah.
Think about the future.
The what? Yeah, think about the future. Yeah. That guy.
Yeah, and that was. I agree. I think that was, and I'm not sure which came first, in the whole thing. But I always, when I was pitching ideas, one of the ones I had in the tank that I'd never gotten when I was pitching stuff to DC, one of the ones I'd never quite gotten finished. I really wanted to do an opposites attract kind of story, not really attract, but play off each other between Harvey Bullock, the cop who, you know, has this very rough opinion toward anybody who's doing law enforcement who's not a cop, and Joe Potato, the private detective, because they have a similar physique but totally opposite outlooks in the world. And I love Potato's shtick, as you know, like the fifth best detective in Gotham City kind of thing. Self-proclaimed fifth best detective in Gotham City, right? And I thought that would be a really, because you know, Bullock would have no respect for Joe Potato, but Joe still has a certain a capacity, a strength of character that I always liked, and that determination that I think just, you know, the never quitting for its own sake is something that is worthy, and I like that about Joe. So, thank you, Alan Grant.
I need to ask something about this pitch. What do you think about the robot nanny?
I hate it. I was working my way to that point. So those of you guys who didn't read this in the back, I'm going to go ahead and lay this out. So Most of this series is a straightforward like adaptation of the DC Comics Batman being told at the time. It's very, I mean, it's like you really could have watched this animated series and gone and picked Batman up off the shelf that was being, and it would have had a lot of similar feel to it. The Batman comics were being written for a little bit older audience than the cartoon was intended for, but other than that, it was very similar. A lot of the lore was very much the same, with one detail. And this one detail was that in the pitch, Straczynski said that Bruce and Dick's relationship became strained as Dick got older. And Bruce feels maybe it's because there's no women in the house. Maybe he's just not the right guy to be raising a kid by himself. So he calls up Superman, but it's not Superman because Nelvana didn't have the rights for Superman. And he calls up Superman and says, hey, you know how to make robots. And so a couple of weeks later, a tomb-shaped package, a coffin-shaped package shows up at the house, and they open it up, and it's a robot woman. This android
red S
with a red S burnt into the bottom of it, a little S shield, just to let the fans know where this really came from.
Right.
and it's a robot nanny. It's a robot nanny, and just which is robot nannies, totally something out of a 1980s family sitcom. Small. It's like a take on Small Wonder or the Computer World Tennis Shoes. Right. It could be a Disney Channel Sunday movie, right? But it's like the whole point is like this. So this robot, like, and Straczynski wrote in here that different people have different takes on it, and it's a very human-like android, and how does Alfred feel about it? And well, it's no replacement for a real servant, and I'm a real servant, and okay, and he plays Batman in chess, and Jason can get all the support that he'd need from a mom from this robot. And I'm just like, okay, kids like robots. Robots were very popular in the 80s TV series. I hate this idea.
Yeah.
And here's part of why. First of all, I think that science fiction and Batman can be really good friends, but there's a limit to where that is. Yeah. And in the world's finest comics, it's a little flexible because you've got Superman. Superman's got all this Kryptonian technology, and Batman's interacting with it, and it's cool. But back in the pages of Batman or Tech, it feels really out of place. And I can't, and I just, when it's too much, when it's on the edges of it, just like with Batman and magic, you don't want Batman working magic spells, but, if Batman's going up against the vampire, he might have some holy water set aside just for such an occasion. That makes sense. Or he might call Jason Blood. Or the Phantom Stranger or whoever,
Coolest Batman story I read that stuck with me back when I was learning to read. Mm-hmm. Batman versus the vampire. And he's thrown wooden stakes at the vampire, and the vampire doesn't die. And it gets to a point where they're battling harder and harder, and the guy was a heart surgeon when he was a human. And Batman realizes that the grandfather clock is ticking louder as they fight. So he takes an arrow and he fires it straight into the face of the grandfather clock. And the heart surgeon had basically removed his heart and hid it in the grandfather clock.
Oh, man.
And that's where the heart was. So he put a wooden stake through the heart that was not in the vampire's body at all. I'm like,
so is that... Man, that's a great one. That's a fascinating
trope that they would do. It was just you don't see that being done now. Something like that.
Well, that's an inversion of expectation. That's awesome. I love that. That's great. Anyway, but yeah. So I think that the robot nanny was just a couple lines too far outside of the Batman paradigm to work in it. But the other thing I found baffling about this being in the pitch, right, is that Straczynski went so far as to develop a love interest for Batman. Actually, a couple. He had a you know, the whole Batman Catwoman thing was on the back burner a little bit, and we very much played off of the way Julie Newmar played Catwoman in the '60s series was reflected in the pitch, and I thought that was fun. But the other one was this character, Frederica. What was her name? I forget.
Frederica Miles.
Miles, right? Freddie Miles. Who's this like? She's in love with like 30s, 40s detectives. She's a straight arrow cop. She thinks that Batman's a little like, you know, maybe he shouldn't be doing it this way, but she's a devoted to Jim and to the police force, Jim Gordon, the police force, and that whole thing. And so she can't not see that Batman's doing good stuff, even if it's not by the book. And they have this whole conflict. Meanwhile, like, Bruce like sees this gal and has this whole thing, and like likes her, but she's just like, playboy, not into it. So there's all of this complexity that's built there. And he goes so far as to say, Strazinsky goes so far as to say in the pitch that he wants to have a close relationship between Robin and Miles, or the woman Miles, in a way that allows him to have somebody who's not part of the household who he can relate to. So he's developing this positive female role model who he interacts with on a semi-regular basis, who's not a robot. But we're going to add the robot nanny too.
Yeah. Miles is like the best of all ants. I thought was a really good term.
The best of all ants. Yeah. And I think that's a really fun thing. But I mean, if you're already playing with this idea of developing her as a potential romantic interest, even if it's on the sly for 10-year-old boys, you don't want to, get the whole thing out there. But the whole robot nanny thing just seems so unnecessary and kind of cringy.
Yeah,
more than kind of cringy
with Alfred.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get why you do that. I don't understand it.
Is it possible that this is the second revision after he's gotten feedback? They're like, there's got to be another female in there. Blah de blah. This is like meddling. This is the point at the development where he puts in a green dog with antennae, or Batmite.
He did 2 drafts.
Hey,
this is the third. This is the third draft, so it's possible.
The third draft. I'm saying, is it possible that she wasn't in the first draft or the second draft, and this is the point where, Kevin Smith is being told, put in giant spider. If people are afraid of spiders, and also, I just saw Star Wars. Make sure that Brainiac gives him an alien dog, and then we can market the alien dog. This is that downfall of the pitch. By the way, isn't it interesting that she's named Miss Chandra? That's the inventor of Hal in 2001: A Space Odyssey, Dr. Chandra. Maybe that's where that comes from.
Did not know that.
I did not either. He just mentions that it was Hindu for moon.
Yeah.
Right.
Now,
that was Bob Balaban's character in 2010: A Space Odyssey. Bob Balaban played Dr. Chandra.
Oh.
Not the year we make contact. 2010, the year we make contact. Yeah.
Okay.
10 years ago. So
RJ, you were going to say?
If I ever run into JMS at a con or tweet him on Twitter, I've got to ask him about this little tidbit he left hanging out in the Bible, though, where he talks about Freddie Miles. He said her closest friend is her father, Alex Miles, a retired police detective with a terrible secret. And no, I'm not telling you. Buy the series and you'll find out.
I do love that part.
Yeah, that was one thing about the pitch that I was really interested when I was asking about, like, how long he'd been in the business, because there's some stuff about the pitch that's like super familiar, which is either like that he just really knew the people he was pitching to, so he was riffing back and forth with them, or he had no idea what he was doing and was just writing it like he would a fanfic.
Yeah.
And so it was like one of those two extremes. Like it was either like he'd been at it for a really long time and just like knew these guys, and like they talked in real life and they knew how their inside jokes and all that kind of stuff. But because it's that stuff where it's like not quite professional, but it is, but it is if you know everyone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, you know, if you read, I don't know if you guys have ever read like the scripts that Neil Gaiman sent to his artists that because he wouldn't work with anybody he hadn't talked to. And Neil Gaiman's scripts are full of that kind of personal language, and he knew every time he worked with the story, he knew who the artist was ahead of time. And so he knew who the artist was ahead of time, and so he had already talked to them and had worked out, so they had their own relationships. And so he would write letters and notes to them personally in his scripts. That would be part of there. So it's like, it's not professional, but because of their relationship, it is. And so it had that feeling where it was either people that he knew, so they already had this dynamic, or it wasn't, or it's just an amateur thing. And I didn't, you know, and it obviously wasn't. Since
he'd already been doing He-Man for either 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And he was doing, and he was, I don't know if it was around the same time he was doing the adaptation of the real Ghostbusters for television. I saw, and he did a bunch of stuff. So, I mean, he must have known the guys already, but that was some of that was just really, I was like, that's bold. I wouldn't be so bold. So one of the areas that I did not get to, because I had to eat something before I came on and I was running out of time. And it was my job to cook tonight. So that's what happened there. But one of the things I did not get to is the actual story pitch at the end of it.
I did
4 episodes.
Yeah.
4 episodes. Yeah.
Were there 4?
Yeah. And they run the gamut of, like you say, the mix of what you can do with the same character. There's one that's just how he meets Jason Todd, and it's probably establishing the tone for the series, establishing the relationships and everything. And so that first episode is like pretty straight. And then there's one where he wants to actually adopt Jason Todd, and the lady comes to, check out this bachelor that wants to adopt a young boy and has no women there to take care of him. And so she moves into the mansion, and somehow this is a very concise summary that's in here. There's not really any details, but she gets the idea that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and then Batman actually appears at the end to dissuade her. Next to Bruce Wayne, they appear together, and it's Alfred dressed up as Batman.
I love that.
Yeah, but so this is pretty much a comedy. The second or third story is pretty much straight comedy, and then it goes from that to a drug episode. Mm-hmm. So which is about his Jason Todd's friends. One of them is clearly on drugs. And that's something for an animated series, trying to have a kid on drugs, and Jason Todd goes out to find who's the connection, and he actually gets violent and everything. That's a pretty serious. You got drugs, you got violence, and he's like taking the law into his own hands, not capturing the drug dealers to go off to the police. He's just getting really violent with them, and this is a pretty gritty story following the one with the the community services lady who shows up and stays in the mansion. And that's quite the shift in tone. So yeah, it is a good example just there of how this series can kind of flip back and forth between the tones of the stories.
Yeah,
I should let RJ talk more about it.
I was going to say, this also being the late 80s of cartoons. The series was designed to have tags at the end of it, the 30-second tags. And he talks about, if a tag is desired, a 30-second piece could be appended to the end of the show just before the end credits, titled something on the order of Secrets of the Batcave. The tag would reveal some of the secrets of Batman's world, the full scope of the Batcave, how a Batarang works, the mysterious trophies they've accumulated, and the like. He said also the tag can have educational purposes by stressing the scientific, detective, criminological aspects of the show. They can discuss how to make invisible ink, how to find your way watching the stars, how to write in codes, and the more you know.
Yeah, the more you know. And that's actually, I tell you what, like there, even though I hadn't gotten to that part of the script, he actually mentioned, or the pitch, he mentions that in the first part too, that like, we'll talk more about that later. And I tell you what, growing up watching, Master of the Universe and G.I. Joe and Thundercats, they always had those kind of things at the back end of them. Even Inspector Gadget, right, had the little 30-second stings at the back of them, and that would be one of those things that were like, I kind of wish that we had gotten that in a Batman series. The some of that stuff, like you had in the tucked into the text of a what?
Didn't we get it with the Filmation series though, with Batmite?
Yeah, there's some of that. There's some of that in the Batmite stuff, but I haven't actually finished watching all the Filmation series. I've just seen the first 3 episodes.
I didn't make it through it either. I owned that and I gave it away. I loved it so much as a kid, and I watched it and it's like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? I couldn't make the reach through watching it. And one of the characters in it is O.J. Simpson, which everybody else recognized except for me. The astronaut who shows up and he's got like a moon man. He becomes a moon man, but he's clearly O.J. Simpson. And everybody else watching it with me said, "That's O.J. Simpson." And I said, "Oh, I guess." But he must have been like modeled after O.J. Simpson clearly, because everybody else watching it says that's O.J. Simpson in the episode.
That's fun.
Well, it was West and Ward doing the voices, which was cool to see them come back, and then it was Melindy. They didn't get Yvonne Craig to do the Batgirl voice, but she was a regular character in there, which why I watched, because Yvonne Craig got me through puberty. Oh, and Hutch.
Yeah.
I did grab it.
That's the book where they started turning Croc into an actual crocodile. Before that, he was just he was like a Southern kid. He's black. He couldn't tell that because his skin was all thing. But he was like one of the first minority villains. But shortly thereafter, he's all green skinned, and you can't tell anyway. But he came from a rough Southern upbringing because he'd been in prison and beaten and stuff like that, and so that's what kind of caused him to be tough. And so, but he was just a guy with a skin condition who filed down his teeth, and then they're really turning him into a crocodile. Yeah. So because of Arkham Asylum changed that about him, and
I have
then all of a sudden. Like 10 years ago, somebody suddenly went back and did the old Killer Croc. He's like wearing suits and he's just got a bad skin condition. I was like,
well, before
wait a minute, what's that?
I said before he was Killer Croc, he was King Croc.
Yeah.
That was his.
If you buy the little Imaginext figures that stand about so high, he's just K Croc.
Oh yeah,
because he can't say killer.
He won't say killer. Yeah.
They won't just call him Croc, so they call him K Croc.
K Croc.
Oh man, I still love Killer Croc's first King Croc, whatever. That when he was a crime lord and he was like taking over Gotham City, and what I remember is of that wonderful what was it, Detective 426, All My Enemies Against Me, which is all the Batman villains, and they killed off a couple of them. They killed off Captain Stingery.
I think that was 427, actually.
427, yeah.
I think it was the 400th anniversary or whatever they want to call it, memorial. I think I've got that one in my closet.
Oh, I love where the Joker is walking backwards from somebody, and meanwhile Batman and Croc are fighting, and Croc puts a mighty fist backwards and clocks the Joker and just like punches him so hard that he is unconscious. He just knocks his melon so hard. And it's a complete accident. Joker's just backing away from somebody else. And I don't know. I love that story. I still love it. I didn't mind it's like, okay, so another kid with, acrobat parents is now being adopted by Batman.
What are the chances?
I actually liked it. Yeah, I know, but it does make sense because they're dead because of I almost said Nightwing. Dick and says, "Could you help me with this investigation?" And they're trailing Croc, and that they get caught and they get thrown to the crocodiles, and it's really dramatic and really sad. And I don't know, it got me choked up when I was a kid. Yeah. And then Jason had like a whole new costume that he threw together, and he sneaks in the back of the trunk of the Batmobile. That's the right. You know, that's the thing. That's even more unlikely than another bunch of dead, circus parents. But some of the stuff with the Batmobile, being able to get in the trunk of the Batmobile, being able to steal the tires off the Batmobile, it's like it all seems very unlikely. The more that we have this modern Batmobile that has, alarms and sensors and stuff like that. But anyway, I can get way too realistic with stuff sometimes. That's my downfall.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, superheroing doesn't work in an age where there's cameras everywhere and facial recognition. But you got to just, yeah.
Somebody was, I can't remember who was talking about that. And my answer to the whole thing was, well, yeah, you're not wrong, but it didn't ever really make sense. We just like to pretend that dressing up in a costume makes sense because it's fun.
Yeah. There's a group. There's groups of people out there. RLSH, real life superheroes. I did an interview with the lady who wrote a book about them. She embedded herself in there with them, and some of them actually go out and foil drug deals and the like. They're not all just picking up trash on the side of the road kind of things. And I got to wondering, it's like some of these guys are getting their ass kicked. Is there somebody out there who's so good at what they do that we don't know they're there? So
it could be
waiting for a camera to catch a Batman or a Tony Stark or something. I mean, I'm like the kid in Kick-Ass. I wrote a story long before Mark Miller did that whole thing. He's like, why isn't somebody doing this?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the things that we have, and one of the reasons that I hate the Civil War, Marvel Civil War, is that one of the assumptions of a superhero universe, even if people don't admit it, right? One of the necessary assumptions of a superhero universe is that individuals maintain the authority to act on behalf of the law outside of government sanction, right? That the power of government comes from the people, so the people maintain the right to act on behalf of the government, because that's one of the assumptions. Even though Batman's a criminal, everyone lets Batman do his thing because Batman has a certain right to do it. It's an assumed thing. Booster Gold can come from the future to be a hero today, and nobody asks any questions because he's a human being, and being a human being, he has the right to act on behalf of justice. He can even make a profit while he does it. And that's one of those.
Do you ever watch? I'm sorry.
I say that's one of those things that Civil War said, no, we're going to ignore that fundamental assumption of a superhero universe, and we're going to make everything super serious so that I can make a statement about the Patriot Act. I mean, because it's the story that I'm telling. And when they did that, they really, I think, killed the Marvel universe. And they took the universe outside your window, and they said, no, it's not real enough to have in a world full of the Sorcerer Supreme and the stretchy genius and the high school kid with the spider powers. We're gonna just we've got to make sure that everything else makes sense.
Yeah, it was leaving the world outside your window to the world inside CNN's window.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. It's similar to what we talked about last time with Identity Crisis, and one of the big problems with it is you're introducing villains who rape, and that really can't be part of comic books. Otherwise, you're going to be wondering why they don't do that to Robin when they capture him, or to anybody. It's just you need to have a little bit of a divider where you just say, this is comic books. It's not that serious. Well, otherwise,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, RJ.
Wasn't even the bad thing in the story. Rape, that would just kick things off. But the bad thing in the story was that the heroes were erasing people's minds. I'm like, so Doc Savage was doing
They do that all the time.
Yeah, it's like, and here's the question: is erasing somebody's mind really worse than raping them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, two things can be bad, but that doesn't mean one's not, that it's worse.
And the Justice League erasing their minds is that a violation? Because if so, then that whole flashy thing from Men in Black is a terrible, terrible crime that you're doing. That's really all they're doing is, we figured out who Clark Kent is. You don't know anymore.
Yeah,
that's all they were doing. They're not doing huge violations of people, but they used to do. I mean, for crying out loud, when Kanjuro first appeared in that thing where he's facing off against those other alien dictators, the Justice League takes the four of them and ditches them on an asteroid that's just a rock in space and puts a force field over it and say, you live there now.
Yeah, or beyond that,
it's like,
the whole idea.
Okay, so you're putting 3 men and 1 woman together.
I was going to say, beyond that, the whole idea of the Phantom Zone.
What's that?
Right? Like, you want to talk about like real world politics and its implications. Like, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it, but like prison is a huge moral question, a huge moral problem, right? The existence of prisons, right? I'm not saying right or wrong, but it's something that has to be addressed by a society. But to say, we're going to put them in a whole dimension, that's a huge question, right?
For eternity,
the Crime Syndicate of America was. Oh, go ahead. I was going to say the Crime Syndicate of America. The first time they appeared, they were put in a four-walled prison, just a block, floating in an in-dimension. There's no toilet, there's no food, and they put the woman in with the 4 guys. And they said, okay, you're there now. Go ahead, RJ.
They liked that idea. Because they were talking about what to do with them, and they're like, watching their expressions, like, oh, they're worried about that one. We better not do that one. I'm like, no. The one they're worried about, that's the one you want to do.
The thing about the whole thing is, I think that comics as a genre is big enough to have super serious, dark, grim, gritty, even grotesque and offensive stories, and more accessible stories. I think the problem that the American industry has, that France has not had, Belgium has not had, Japan has not had, was that America in the last 20 years has decided to go whole hog on these adult style comics. And I don't mean like every comic's Love and Rockets, but what I'm talking about is like every comic is marketed to 18 to 42 year olds, right? We're not marketing we're not marketing comics except for Archie's and like some DC kids. DC has done some trying to get the youth market. Scholastic has a very strong youth market. But your main comic book companies are working themselves out of a business because they're not doing what Strazinsky did in this pitch we're talking about, which is make something accessible for kids, right? Making something that hits those serious and funny notes that are going to keep kids wanting to come back week after week. And that's what Tim and Denny did with the animated series. And why, there's a ton of comic fans that I know whose first that are in that millennial age that I know on Twitter and on other social media stuff. They got into comics because they were watching Batman the Animated Series. They were watching Freakazoid. They were watching the X-Men cartoon, the Spider-Man cartoon that was all out at the same time, that had these all ages kind of feel to them, and they got into comics through their television set, right? But we're not even doing. I mean, like, that's not what's going on right now. And even if, like, in the big Marvel movies that are, they're for the whole family, that whole thing. But those people that are interested in reading comics or interested in the characters, if they can't go to the drugstore and buy comics, And if they do venture into the comic shop, they're not going to find anything on the shelf that matches what they were just watching on the screen.
And there's nothing appropriate for them. There's nothing appropriate to give a kid. I would not give a Batman book to a kid.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
In the 1970s, the 1980s, even the 1990s, you could pick any mainstream title off a shelf, and an adult fan could read it and enjoy it, and a kid getting his first comic could pick it up and read it and enjoy it. And you can't do that now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hate
that's
to say it, but when they phased out the comics code, they said we're getting rid of the comics code. I initially was, I was never a hater of it. Some people just hated it, obviously. I mean, the issue of censorship and all that, and how it was generally, it wasn't foisted on them, but they agreed to do it because of the whole hearings thing in the 50s. They started saying, we will have, these are the things we'll do. And some of it was really ridiculous. You couldn't show a dead body in a war comic. You couldn't, married couples are in separate beds and all that sort of stuff. But,
that's a terrible thing.
I understand they loosened up a little bit, but then they ditched it. And it was like almost immediately, it's like, well, this is fine as long as you guys, have your own code that you're behaving by. And no, it's like just cut loose, and that's the problem. Immediately, everything is it's basically mature readers, but unlabeled. We don't have the swear words, but otherwise, and you won't see nipples. But but Green Lantern is they're raining eyeballs from people's families down on them, and it's just, oh my goodness, it's just they didn't have an internal standard, and I really you can't pick up a book and just have it be an all ages
I think
thing.
that.
And I don't want something that's labeled for kids. Even when I was a kid, I didn't like something that says for kids in big letters.
Yeah.
I just want a normal book. So
and that's one of the things that coming back around to something we were talking about in the first hour, the power of the editorial, right? If editorial controls, you're talking about Julie Schwartz, and his marketing sense. You're thinking about people like Denny O'Neil and how. You may not. I mean, there's a lot of arguments to be made that not all of his editorial decisions were spot on, but he knew how to corral that corner of the universe to be cohesive and feel like a unit. You look at the way that oh my goodness, I'm going to forget his name.
I hate when that happens.
I can't remember. He was. I know it's the worst. No, he was the editor. Archie Goodwin, knew how to breathe life into his creators, that also preserved the sanctity of the sandbox, right? And so that when they left it, it was pristine. Anybody who came on after, it was great. And these guys, they had a passion for the continuation of the thing. And whether Archie was, because he did stuff for Marvel and DC, and it was the same story in either way. It wasn't like he was just a company man. But it was one of those things where they were able to breathe the importance of that through the system. And it was one of those things that and at least there hasn't been in the last 20 years, that kind of vision to build something that lasts. There's been vision.
They found out they can reboot.
And that was, and
in fact, in yesterday's issue of In Action Comics by Voldemort, the guys are standing around talking, because that's what you do in Action Comics, realizing that they've been rebooted, and that they've been rebooted multiple times. They have become self-aware, like somebody from a Kurt Vonnegut novel, that they're characters in a story, which is inevitably leading to the idea that it's going to happen again. You expect it now. Superman's told everybody who he is. There's no way out of putting the genie back in that bottle unless you reboot the universe again, and let him date Wonder Woman for a while.
So we need to wrap up the show, but I have to ask.
We got 3 shows going on now.
Yeah, I have to ask a quick question on here. Do you think that they're gonna like reboot Superman to a pre-Bendis version where oh man, he's gone. Where John's back to being where John's back to being a kid and nobody knows who Superman is and to get a new writer on? Because I mean, I've heard rumors that Bendis is on his way out of the super house.
But I don't know. I hope so. I think they didn't realize how much of a fan following they actually had with the Super Sons, with the whole John Kent and Damian Wayne team up going on there.
I'll be completely honest. I kind of hated Damian before Super Sons. Like, I mean,
he was a psychopath.
Yeah. And after, I'm just like,
to help balance him out, like it took Superman and Batman to balance each other out. But
so, man, so
I cannot stand this issue.
Yeah, that's disappointing. Anyway, so we are at the 2-hour mark, and Hutch is gone. So I guess we'll go ahead and call it. For those of you guys who stuck around in the chat, appreciate you guys coming in there. I don't know what the this pitch was really interesting to read, and RJ, thanks for bringing it to my attention. It's been a real deep dive into everything from the 80s and 90s comics wise.
Yeah, if you do want to read it, I do have the article at criticalblast.com with a link to the PDF on our drive. So you can find the article there. Just search on Strazinsky; it'll get you there somehow.
Yeah, and in the description, I'm going to go ahead and I can if you get me that link, I'll put it up there. I want to put one to criticalblast.com. I was going to ask Hutch some other questions about that because I didn't put any links or anything in the description because I threw it together while I was firing the grill up tonight.
Now I'm hungry.
I've been super disorganized. Next week on the show, Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini are going to come by to talk about Black Ops 3. They don't know it yet, but I'm going to be pumping them for information on that. And they've got the third Walmite is for sale right now. Their gold edition has got it's the collection of all 3 of those stories. I don't know if there's any left. There were yesterday like 60 copies, but I don't know if there's any left. So by the time they come on the show, you will not be able to get Walmite, the gold standard. But you can pre-order it at your local comic shop to be delivered in like September or whatever. So,
or your LCS.
Absolutely. And for everybody, I'm going to say thanks again. And you guys go out there and keep loving comics. So, later.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming.